Without further ado, let me introduce our guests today. Our presenters are Leah Bamberger, who's the Director of Sustainability for the City of Providence, and Jesus Holgun, who's a Providence community member and has been an active part of the climate justice work that the City of Providence is doing. So Leah and Jesus, would you like to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Sure, thank you, Kelly. So yes, my name is Leah Bamberger. I'm the Director of Sustainability for the City of Providence. I've been here in Providence and in this role for about 6 years now, and previously I worked for the City of Boston, managing their sustainability programs. I'll leave it at that, and Jesus, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Cool. Thank you. Hi, y'all. My name is Jesus Holguin. My pronouns are they or AJ or anything as long as there's not a negative intent. And I am a founding member of the REJC. I serve as a project team member. And then that's just the folks who do the day-to-day, some of the folks who do the day-to-day work. And personally, for me in Providence, I just aim to create a holistic, safe space for Providence young folks, making sure that we're covering the spaces we are in, the air we breathe, the water we have access to, and the food we have access to, while also talking about policing and not policing people for their skin color, who they love, or how they express themselves. And so all of that, it's holistic environmental justice.
Great. Thank you very much. So let's dive into the presentation. You want to take us away, Leah?
So I guess wanted to start by giving a little bit of context here and sort of more on my background. I think I lost you there. And so when I came to the city about 6 years ago, or I guess 5.5 years ago at this point, I was coming off of the work I did in Boston, working on their climate action plan. And in that work was really intending to start to incorporate equity more into that work. Kind of at the time, it was understood that equity was a part of sustainability that wasn't, and a part of climate action that really just wasn't getting the attention it deserved or needed, but really lacked the resources and the know-how, the technical know-how, and the relationships in the community of how to do that work well. So when I came to Providence and started to get to know the city, the community here, and saw and having conversations with people like Jesus and others in the environmental justice community and advocates, I really saw a discrepancy between what was in the city's sustainability plan and the issues that the community was facing, especially in our frontline or the low-income communities of color. And I had the opportunity to do some trainings from the Urban Sustainability Directors Network about what it means to be doing this work and incorporating equity, what are some basic definitions, just gave me enough information to help me get started. And the other critical piece was a partnership with the Environmental Justice League of Rhode Island. And that organization really helped kind of initiate the relationships and guide the work in the very beginning. And we also received a grant from Partners for Places to start this work, and the funding was really important. And we had a great funder who understood the challenges, was able let us do the work slowly and take our time. So all those things were really important to getting started. Jesus, did you want to add anything on that?
Sure. As part of AJ League, and I think actually we get into it some more actually later on, but as a part of AJ League, bringing in the community was our main thing at the table, was just making sure that our community had access to making changes on the work that the Office of Sustainability was doing.
All right. A bit of context in Providence. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the city and our history, but I think it's really important to emphasize and understand the connection that the Industrial Revolution and had on the connections that it had, of course, to climate change, but also to the slave trade. An enormous amount of wealth was generated in Providence and the surrounding area, and really in the northeast. And these were based on these mills, these cotton spinning factories that were using cotton that was generated and extracted by slave labor in the South. And it had a tremendous impact on our landscape, the landscape of the city of Providence and other industrializing cities at the time. And again, a lot of wealth was generated for white men, and it had a tremendous impact on our rivers, on our land, our culture, institutions. This was a tremendous time of growth, and in a lot of ways, destruction. And the impacts of this are still being felt, and you can still see the sort of scars on our landscape from this time, from the old mill buildings. Some have been repurposed, many more have been lost and destroyed, and others still remain vacant. And we also still have a very industrial legacy in the Port of Providence as well. So, Jesus, do you want to talk more about that and on this?
Yeah, no, I think I'll just add that the intention behind this work is acknowledging and knowing the history of the land. And so part of this map, this is just one of many maps to show some of the toxic industries or infrastructures that are in or where there are in Providence. And a lot of the spaces where you see the colors from grading from red to yellow, those are our environmental justice community, right? The places where there are more industries. I think this one is covering is it asthma rates?
The EJ index.
So it's yeah, thank you. But I only get confused because we have so many maps of one thing of asthma, of toxic sites, and if you lay them all on top of one another, you'll see the parallels that it always falls within these communities. And I think that's just making sure that we're uplifting that while we're doing this work is important.
And I'll just add that.
Go ahead.
Are you guys hearing?
I think we all need to mute when we're not.
Okay. Oh, that's better. So this definition of frontline communities, sometimes when I talk about this work in other places, I hear that, our communities don't appreciate that term, and this is a term that was created from our partners in the Environmental Justice League and others in the community, and this definition specifically. So it is really important that folks take the time to have those conversations and figure out what works and who are these communities and how do they want to be named and identified.
Leah, excuse me, are you able to put your presentation in present mode so it's a little bigger? I think folks are having hard time seeing it. Yeah, if you go to.
So if I do that, then I can't do anything else. So I can't see. But
no. Okay.
You can guide me through our notes and our kind of program here. But that's fine.
Whatever works for you.
We can make this. So we started, as I mentioned, we had some funding to start this process, and really the initial intent was to bring in, incorporate equity into the city's sustainability plan. And we did that, initially it was okay, well, my thought was initially we'll just, add a sustainability, do some outreach and engagement, and then add in equity into our sustainability plan. But the process and the folks that were guiding it, which was really our community members, it shifted a lot. So we ended up, starting by doing racism trainings, which are really important to get that kind of foundational shared understanding of the systemic nature of racism and what we were trying to do. And we spent a couple years just building a framework and relationships with this new group called the Racial and Environmental Justice Committee. And he's take it from here.
Yeah. No, and I think that some like Leah said, it took 2 years to create just the framework, and that framework was really about gaining trust from the community to the city, right? And making sure, because part of this acknowledgement is that we had a bunch of powerful organizers in the space who like do amazing work, and we did not want to be pacified by the city, right? We did not want our work to be taken out of the streets where we're in and be put into the city for the city to check a box and say like we're doing things, and not actively doing the things that we need to do. And so a lot of that came from us being able to trust that the city acknowledges the like harms that it's caused, the harm that comes with like policy, like everyday life and policies that folks pass, to specifically like Black and brown communities. And then and then I'll just add, so a part of that trust, it like was me being able to see like my mayor at like undoing racism trainings and having these conversations and being there for the full amount of the day, and like not, you know, sneaking out or whatever, but like actually going through that, and I think that is really where what has allowed us to continue doing this work is taking that time at the beginning to really be intentional about making sure that like we make acknowledgements, there's like trust in the space so that we know that we're going to move forward.
Yeah, and Jesus mentioned our mayor and the support that we had was really important to the process, the political support, the leadership, and I think specifically just the fact that, you know, we had our Mayor Elorza was supportive, but not, he was pretty hands-off in the process and really let the process unfold. So a lot of times when you have a political or like leadership that is really engaged in this work, they're going to want to see, you know, all right, we want a climate justice plan. We want to be doing this work and kind of push forward an agenda from the top, which actually can be very like detrimental to the process, because there were times where we had to slow down. There were times where you know, issues would come up and we'd have to pause, and it really had to unfold organically. We often say the work happens at the speed of trust. So not having that rushed sense of urgency, or, you know, oh, you know, the mayor wants to do a press conference on this, or those sorts of artificial deadlines that politicizes the work, not having that sort of pressure was really helpful. And I will also say that the other important piece, so the undoing racism training is very important for building the trust and establishing a common framework. The political leadership, and then also having the funding to compensate community members for their expertise. So all the folks on the Racial and Environmental Justice Committee were paid to be doing this work with the city, just like we would pay a consultant or an engineer for their expertise. It's really important to honor the expertise that community members bring to the table. So as Jesus mentioned, this framework was being developed. My role really was to be at the table and to support and to listen, and then also keep other stakeholders informed. So this bottom picture here is the Environmental Sustainability Task Force meeting, which is my sort of community advisory board. And throughout the process, you know, they were very supportive. I kept them informed. They all recognized that that group was predominantly white. They recognized, you know, they needed to do more work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. They weren't representing the entire city, and that needed to shift. So I kept them informed, and they knew what was happening. And we decided to bring the framework to the Environmental Sustainability Task Force so they could review it, adopt it, say, yes, this is great. We want the city or the Office of Sustainability to use this framework going forward in the work. And I thought that it would be well received. I thought, knowing the support that this committee had for the work, I invited the mayor. I had the REJC come in and present to the task force, and I was very, very surprised and quite frankly appalled at the reception that it got. And there were folks who didn't, some of the language in the framework about, it covers issues, acknowledgments of past harms that the city has done, and principles and values, including, addressing topics like the school to prison pipeline and policing and things like, traditional sort of sustainability issues around like waste and energy and just holistic communities. But there was a lot of confusion. Folks weren't comfortable with some of the language or made them uncomfortable, and they weren't able to vote on it and pass it. They did reconvene a week later and adopt it and support it, but it was very disappointing that it took that time and it wasn't well received. Jesus, you want to add anything about that experience?
Yeah, I think that right there was the like one, we didn't want to do that because this was the piece around, we've been doing this work for 2 years with Leah, and this is the pieces where people can feel pacified. Right now, we've been doing this work, got this work going, it's beautiful, and now we have to present it to a body of like white folks who are not going to get it, but have access to like making the changes that we need. And I think what like the most that I can uplift in that moment, outside of, being like, I told you so to Leah, being like, this is what was going to happen, is like, and Monica said it best, was who's a co-founder, like, this work is going to happen no matter what, whether it's us like applying to take your seats at this table and then passing it, or like you passing it. And through that, the ESTF has gotten better around making sure that there is table space for like 2 REJC members to help that work move forward. And yeah, no, I think that specifically was one of those pieces of like, oh my God, we're being pacified because we just spent our capacity of 2 years doing this work. And if they say no, like, then what happens next, right? And so really getting there. But they passed it. We were able to work on moving Providence just in just transition.
It was an important moment for the work. And there were transitions. Echo. Sorry. Jesus, are you muted? There.
Yeah, I wasn't, but.
Yeah, so there was a lot of change on the task force after that, and it was a really important learning moment for everyone. It was painful at the time, but I think it did start to show the beginning of the relationship between the REJC and the city, which was really critical. So the sort of next big moment, so we have this framework that we're using to understand how to incorporate equity that was created by frontline community members. And really the REJC is, we can go through the framework and say, all right, we think this policy meets these principles and values, but unless we have that accountability and that relationship with frontline communities to confirm and to say, like, yes, this policy or this program doesn't have unintended consequences or cause harm in our community, it's not just like a tool that you can use and be done with it. The relationship and the accountability to community is really important. So we had a city council member who was interested in a plastic bag policy. There wasn't a lot of urgency around it. I thought this would be a great opportunity to work with the REJC and to have them review the policy with us and understand it and make sure that it's equitable. And while that was starting, the council member introduced the policy. It started moving very quickly, sort of leaving our process by the wayside. And there were concerns from the REJC about the policy called for a 10-cent fee on paper bags. So it would ban plastic bags, allow paper bags with a 10-cent fee. And there was concern that this would disproportionately impact low-income communities and communities of color in the city who, for whatever, they ride the bus. They might not have their bags, their reusable bags stored in their car. They are more likely to, that 10-cent fee is going to have a bigger impact on them than, someone else who is, higher income. And so there were concerns, but meanwhile, this policy was moving through city council. It was voted on twice by the council, which that's the way ordinances are passed in Providence. It needs 2 votes. The first vote, every single council member voted in favor of it. The second one, the REJC expressed their concerns via a letter, which went to all the council members the day before the vote, the second vote. And a few council members abstained or backed off. But for the most part, it still had strong support in the council, and it went to the mayor to be signed. And I met with the mayor, and he saw the concerns from the RHAC and said, Leah, what do you think I should do? Should I pass this or veto it? And ultimately, again, we had created the RHAC to serve as this accountability and this kind of authority on what's equitable and what's good for their communities. And they're clearly saying this is not, even though this policy was extraordinarily popular, especially among environmentalists. Everyone wanted to see the capital city of the state ban plastic bags. But with the RHAC saying this was not going to be a good thing for their community, it was my responsibility to sort of uphold that relationship and to recommend that the mayor veto, and that is what he did. So Jesus, I'm sure you have your there too.
Yeah, just coming in from like the community and getting they're like, yeah, oh my God, plastic bag. Like, first of all, I reuse my plastic bags in my trash bin in the bathroom and in different places. So like, I appreciate my plastic bags, but they don't have to be plastic. I can get other kind of bags. So like, I appreciate the sentiment behind banning plastic bags. I also see the videos of the turtles in the nose and all that, and I'd be like, oh my God. So like, I definitely see the need and importance. And I think what really stuck out when this thing came out was, we started doing research as REJC, and just with a little bit of research, we saw that Chicago made $2.6 million off of it in 4 to 6 months off of their plastic bags fees in their poorest neighborhoods. And so just looking at that, thinking about, and there wasn't a plan in this bill for like where this money would go and how that money, like who's spending that money. Is it on, the people, right? It was on the people, but, we talked about what does it look like if this was actually on the corporations, like selling, making sure that they gave out like more friendly bags. And so I feel like that piece of the process of just figuring out how it was unjust and how we can fix it. And then I would say, just looking at the communities.
Kind of talk about how ultimately passed.
Oh yeah, it being passed. Oh, so in order, once it got vetoed, we then sat with the folks who were trying to pass the plastic bags, and they created a seat for REJC at the table to have the conversations around why is this not equitable, why how to foreplan it a little bit, what are ways that we can streamline a process that would be more equitable, and through that we were able to pass the plastic bag ban without the fee, and it's on the stores to provide paper bags, boxes, whatever is around that folks can use.
Yeah. Again, I think this is another good example of the city sharing.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
that's okay. I can't see anybody. I'm just looking at the slide because I'm in full screen mode. anyways, but so it was a good example of the city sharing power, sharing decision-making power, and really centering the priorities and concerns of frontline communities. And that's a big culture shift for the mayor to veto a bill that was unanimously supported by council. That doesn't happen very often. But sharing that decision-making, sharing that power with frontline communities is a really important part of this work. So up to the climate justice plan. Earlier, the mayor had set a goal for Providence to become carbon neutral by 2050, and we were doing all this work to incorporate equity. We had the framework, we made some good progress, and the city received a grant to develop a plan to meet our carbon neutral goals, incorporating this work on racial justice and equity. And we didn't, in the beginning, it was just, let's create a equity focused climate action plan, or a climate action plan with an equity lens. And we didn't set out to and know that we were creating a climate justice plan, but the process by which it unfolded, at the end of it, it was clear that that's what this work really was about. And so we continued to work with the Racial Environmental Justice Committee. They were leading the community engagement process. In the summer, we did I guess this was the summer of 2018, we did a energy democracy training with community members. So 10 community members were trained in understanding how our energy system works. These are all frontline community members, many of which were REJC members, some were new. And then from there, those folks went out and interviewed people in the community, and they asked very simple questions. How do you stay warm in the winter? What's good about that? What would you change? Yes, here's our process. How do you keep cool in the summer? What do you like about that? What would you change? How do you get around the city? What's good about that? What would you change? And is there anything in your community that's making you or your family sick? And those 4 questions helped us get input on what the priorities and concerns were from frontline communities, and then we could design our solutions based on those. And we made sure that every policy, and we had a partner, a technical partner, Acadia Center, who was working on the greenhouse gas modeling and aligning our policies with our goals. And so we had this extensive list of policies and actions that we could implement or advocate for at the city or state level. And we made sure that all those policies aligned and addressed the priorities and concerns that we heard from frontline communities in that process. And from there, we ended up with a long list of things to do and actions, and we wanted to communicate that back to the community members who had participated. And we realized that was a big challenge because it got technical, and there's some things in there, policies, that it's not immediately clear how that's going to actually help people and impact their lives and address their priorities and their concerns. And so the REJC developed these future stories that I encourage you to check out on our website. They're audio clips, so they're on SoundCloud, and you can listen to them in Spanish or in English. And it describes like community perspectives on what the city is like. So it's a neighbor talking about what they're doing and what's going on in their neighborhood, how things are changing how things are improving. And it touches upon the actions, the policies that are in the climate justice plan. So it's a really effective tool to communicate this work back out to the community. Jesus, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I think that some like the most interesting parts of that was going through the process of learning the way energy is distributed throughout our region and just like nationally, and just getting the understanding of like what happens in spaces around us impact us here in Providence, and what happens here in Providence impacts the spaces around us that we distribute to, or folks use our port to. And I think I appreciated asking such simple questions in our surveys, because it got to the like day-to-day lives of folks, and people. And so I feel like I should like uplift one of the ones that are here. And I'll just start with this one. Those huge tanks at the port are just scary. They look like they could blow up anytime. Wait, I think something did a few months ago, and then nasty stuff spilled on islands. What are they bringing in and out of there anyways? Definitely not benefiting me. Just adds to the traffic pollution and makes me wish I could move. And so, like, again, these are people's experiences, and that also didn't age well because something else just happened at the port, with like something catching on fire. And so again, it got to those pieces of what does the community see as its priority and as its needs, and it's the stuff that we've been saying that we don't want in our communities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, can you mute, please?
Yeah.
A lot of times these issues were some of the more challenging issues to tackle from an environmental perspective. And so I think one of the things that's very different about the climate justice plan compared to other climate action plans is we're prioritizing emissions. You know, yes, we want to get to carbon neutrality by 2050, but we want to do it in a way that prioritizes emissions reductions that have sort of co-harms, that have co-pollutants that are causing harm. So emissions from the port and pollution related to the port, yes, there's CO2 emissions there, but it also has particulate matter and other pollutants that are negatively impacting the communities, frontline communities. These are low-income communities of color in that surrounding area. So we're going to focus on those emissions because while they might be harder to address from industry, we're not the enforcement. That's the state that is responsible for enforcing the environmental laws in that area. But it's really important that the city is doing what we can and supporting those efforts, because those emissions are, if we can reduce those emissions, we're having so many co-benefits from cleaning that up versus energy efficiency, also really important. But it's not having the same impact in our community. So kind of understanding those connected impacts, the health benefits is really important, and I think is something that is front and center in this plan, and you don't see it very often. So I mentioned the future stories. We had a great celebration when the plan was released with our community partners. It was a fun day with stories and events and food in one of our parks next to a recreation center. And at the same time, there was some murmurs in City Hall about a waste transfer station that was going to be, potentially going to be proposed in South Providence, in the port area, in the communities that we're building these relationships with. And I think I have a slide on this. Yeah, so I was very very concerned about this. It was in conversation with the planning department. It seemed like it was going to be allowed by right in our zoning code. There was going to be little that the city could do. And so, here we are celebrating this success and this plan, which was getting a ton of national attention. And, business as usual was still, status quo was still going strong. We hadn't yet had an opportunity to change the laws, to change the zoning code. These are things we're working on now. But so there was a lot of pushback for this proposal, and fortunately, internally, when I finally got to have a conversation with the mayor's office about it, their response was, well, we just passed this climate justice plan. There's no way we can approve this facility. And with that, and some luck and perseverance on the city's side and the zoning, the planning department, which because they found essentially a loophole that allowed us to deny the facility, and the mayor opposed the development, and so I think again, this is a good example of that power shift. And again, it's like a cultural shift that's happening, even when, you know, the policy changes are really important, but it's also about the culture of how you make decisions. Both of those changes are really important and critical to this work. You know, you can have great laws, but if they're not enforced well and there isn't the culture to uphold the intent of those laws, then that's not going to be effective in achieving the equitable outcomes. Similarly, if you have a really strong culture and good people doing this work, but the laws aren't there, you're going to hit roadblocks. And so what we're really trying to do, you know, we started with the people side and the relationships. I think that's the right place to start. And we're now getting to a point where we're looking at our zoning, we're making policy changes. We have two ordinances introduced into our city council to support this work. We're trying to make updates to our comp plan, really trying to institutionalize this work, but that's just as important as the relationships and the culture. Jesus, you want to add?
Nah, you did. You did it. That was awesome.
All right, why don't you take what's next? Open up to questions.
Yeah. So moving forward, some of the things that we have planned. Right now, we are working with the Department of Environmental Management to talk about basically having the same conversations that we had at the beginning of REJC around, what's the word? Gatekeeping. Liberated gatekeeping. And so making sure that folks we're able to really have the conversations that we've had throughout this hour, just with the folks at DM, really surrounding around green justice zones. And that's just there's two areas in Providence, which you saw on the map, which were all colored up, both in the south side where the port is and in Oneyville, have been deemed as dumps, not dumps, but as toxic, as green justice zones, spaces that need to be intentional on who's coming in and what is coming up out of it. We're going to update the comprehensive plan. And stuff that isn't actually even on here, we're working on, and this is because it's more recent, so it's hot off the press, y'all. We're looking at transportation in Rhode Island. We had started some of that work around what are the needs around transportation justice that folks need in Providence, and we're going to uplift that. Yeah.
Great. Stop sharing my screen now, and we can take questions. So I hope that gave you, this work is, it takes time, it's complicated, and it is very relationship driven. And, we wanted to kind of share the story of how we got to where we are. Of course, you can look more, dig into the climate justice plan online to understand more about that. But Kelly, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks so much. That was super interesting. I'll just put a couple questions out and then we'll open it up to the audience because we lost a little time at the beginning to technical issues. I'm curious, you described a moment, the bringing this plan to the city and there being a lot of discomfort and then it being approved a week later. I'm curious, what changed and how did you get people past that discomfort and move it forward?
I think yeah, so there was a lot of challenges with keeping traditional stakeholders informed, and we talk about in the climate justice plan the spectrum of engagement to ownership and understanding where you are with various stakeholders. Are you informing? Are you engaging? Are you collaborating? Are you deferring to? And for us, we were really trying to collaborate with the REJC, but that meant other stakeholders were just going to be informing, and they weren't really having an active role because we were trying to center the voices of frontline communities. And so keeping those sort of traditional, sometimes traditional environmental groups informed was really important to the process, and sometimes there was pushback. Folks wanted to make sure they wanted to have, they're accustomed to being a part of these processes. They have a lot of expertise. But this plan was really not about that or about them. And I think one thing that really helped was the undoing racism trainings that we did in the beginning, because we through that formulated some really strong allies. So there was one meeting I was presenting to the Environmental Council, the Environmental Council of Rhode Island, and I was getting some pushback, and there were some folks who were able to step in and say and sort of defend the process. So these were, other members of, not traditional like white-led environmental orgs that were able to speak up and say, this is actually really important that it happens this way and that we're uplifting these voices and really, just kind of validate the work. And same thing with intern, like the mayor did the training, as Jesus mentioned, and has an understanding of the shifts that we're trying to do. So just having those allies to support the work and building those relationships along the way was really important.
So we've been focused on Providence, but I think we have folks from all over New England with us today, and perhaps from elsewhere. And environmental justice issues and climate issues, span city boundaries and state boundaries. Jesus, I'm curious, what advice would you have for someone who's looking to do this kind of work in another place, whether it's another city or small town or a suburb?
Yeah, thank you. So I would say I'm also a part of Renew. And so there is legislation regionally that folks can support. And which is like, our Green New Deal in New England. And so I think throughout this whole process, something that specifically even like white environmentalists need to like understand or like get is the urgency that you have to like save the planet, and like, we got to do it now, we got to do it now. We have that same urgency, but when everyone is not included in that conversation and it's just the players that have been in the room since forever, it creates a plan that perpetuates the problems that we're fighting. So making sure that like you don't let your urgency move you into making decisions for people's lives that are going to affect them without them being a part of that process and part of the decision-making power.
Thank you. So we're at 10 o'clock, and I did promise to leave 15 minutes for questions from the audience. So why don't we open it up to the audience? So if you have a question for Jesus or Leah, if you want to just put it in the chat, we will take some questions. We've got some.
Happy to address Eric's question about how we're building structures to institutionalize this collaboration and this work. And there is an entire section in the Climate Justice Plan on collaborative governance, and there are specific goals and strategies related to that. We know that this work needs to be institutionalized, and the relationships are important, but not enough. So that's where, in that section are things like designate 2 seats on the Environmental Sustainability Task Force to environmental justice leaders or organizations. And then there's around like diversity, goals and targets within city government, and how can and anti-racism trainings within city government. So those are some of the ways that we're trying to really codify that shift and improve those relationships.
All right, we have a question from Eric. Thank you, Jesus and Leah, for sharing your work and the challenges of bridging community activism and city government. Given the issues around plastic bags, where REJC was not initially consulted about the ban proposal, there have been structures built since then to promote proactive collaboration, REJC and city councilors to craft new policies rather than be reactive to isolated decisions.
Yeah, sorry, that was the one I was just addressing, but Jesus, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you said it. Like, It's hard um, to like create this work as we're doing it, right? Like that's one of the hard parts, to make sure that like we're being intentional with all these things and not being reactionary. Um, and so I think you explained it well. Like, you know, we're figuring that out.
Any other questions from the audience? I apologize, folks. My eyes are not very good, and I'm having a difficult time reading some of the stuff on these screens.
There's a couple more that can come in, so I can read those. So Abby asked, where did the resources come from to pay the committee members? It was grant money we received initially from Partners for Places, and then the Bar Foundation has been a partner in this work with the Climate Justice Plan. And I would just add that, you know, when we applied for these grants, we tried to apply for them with, like, initially with the, it was with the Environmental Justice League of Rhode Island. We applied for those grants together, so we were designing the project together from the start, and that's really important. And then there's a question, Jesus, that you might want to take from Luciana about, is there a way to get involved in the Racial Environmental Justice Committee?
Yes and no. So I think for specifically, I don't know who's in the room. So like people in Providence and in Rhode Island, I guess. Yeah, like we like I feel like we're specifically how do I even answer that? Uh we are always going through process of bringing in community folks. And you know, folks, as this work continues to get bigger, folks continue to, you know, get like their capacities shrink, because it's like, oh, this is what, now we need someone else for this. And so I think there's definitely always spaces for folks to get involved with REJC. You know, outside of us doing these kinds of talks, and come into folks' spaces to like let them know what we're doing. Outside of that, we just try to open, um, you know, we try to be super intentional on how we bring folks in, so that they don't get lost in the sauce, because it's a lot. I hope that answered your question.
Do you have any other questions? Well, I'll put one out there. Jesus, I'm curious. It really sounds like this climate justice plan was, you know, the impetus for kind of a cultural shift at the city, and I'm curious, like, how else you see power shifting to communities, and where you think there's still more work to be done.
Everywhere, right? I think, right, like there's a piece. We, you know, we only have so much capacity, and so that is like really what we're getting to. Like we would want those levels of, like, we don't want to intervene. We would want to be a part of the process, right? Like we want to get to a place where folks are not just passing policy and allowing folks into our communities without the community say and input on how they do it. And so, you know, when it comes, like I said, from talking about environmental justice holistically, um, it's not just the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the spaces we occupy. It's also about our skin color, like being policed for our skin color, and police for who we love, and like how we express ourselves. So within all of those different realms, or systems, we have work that we need to do. Um, and you know, it always starts with the people.
And Leah, I'm curious if, you know, for folks here who may be interested in doing this kind of work in their communities, who are the key people within kind of a city government structure, or even a small town structure, that need to really be brought on board early to create the kind of buy-in that's needed to facilitate a culture shift?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll kind of incorporate it. Looks like CJ just asked a similar question about, suggestions for communities who are just starting this work. And I think, Jesus, you probably could add to this as well. So from my perspective in government, this work there's a lot of internal work that has to happen. There's a lot of individual work that has to happen. I was very, as I told my story, like, I was very new to this. I didn't come to this work with a background in racial justice or racial equity or lived experience in that. And so I really had to focus on learning and building relationships with community. I'm not from Providence either, so that was another kind of hurdle. And then internally, it's finding the right allies internally is very helpful in the beginning. So whether that's someone, maybe if there's like, you have like an equity person in HR, or, for us, it was like our Healthy Communities office was doing a lot of this work. Arts, Culture, and Tourism office were really strong allies. And I would my advice would be to like really just focus on finding, even if it's like 3 people or one person, one community partner that you're starting to build a relationship, focusing on those individual and like one-on-one relationships, or a very small group of folks that you can get support from and guidance. That's way more than like a critical mass of like trying to reach 100 people in the community, or trying to get fill a meeting in City Hall to talk about racial justice. Focusing on the small and the right people rather than quantity. Jesus, I'm curious what your advice would be if from like a community member trying to start to engage with local government, what you might suggest.
Let them know you don't trust them. I don't know. I think there's so many spaces to start this conversation. And even in like the initial research of this work, the conversation came from so many different places, right? There was some conversations around eco municipalities that came into from community, from colleges, from nonprofits and organizations, from the city itself. So it really depends on where the conversation is starting and coming from. I think for me specifically that I try to be as transparent as possible. And so I think the space around trust and building those pieces of I'm not being this is not just something you're gonna just check a box to say I'm doing Black people things and we're good. It's really getting into it and having that commitment. I think Leah definitely showed the commitment, even with us being we don't trust you. We don't trust you to tell our story. We don't trust, right? While we've been building this for 2 years together. No, the trust is still not there. And the acknowledgement of the trust is not there because the city has never been the city's best intentions has never been good for Black and brown folks. And so really getting that to the core and that understanding of one, this is where the barriers and obstacles come from when community want to interact with the city. But also just the you need to acknowledge these things so that I can even feel comfortable being in the room to say what I feel. Yeah, I think I'll leave that there.
Thank you for that. So we have land trust practitioners and public officials and other folks from around the region here. What's one thing that you would like people to do when they leave the conference around climate justice?
I feel I can uplift one of our norms, or in the ways we work, and it's basically struggle together. It's the process that we've been going through with all the folks doing this work is struggling together, recognizing that we're not going to solve this in a day. So leaving that urgency, and struggling to figure out what is the urgency that we really need as a community, not just as individuals. And so I think I'll definitely just uplift a piece of struggling together, because if you don't like, and struggling together, you think that like, oh, struggling together is like technical difficulties. It's not that. It's that I don't trust you and I'm doing this work for you, with you. And we're struggling together to figure out how this looks, and how it's beneficial to our communities. So like struggle with people, those hardest parts are the biggest obstacles, but it gets to like a deeper and better we.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Leah,
Leah,
any
any?
you'd like folks to take away?
Just building off of what Jesus shared, this work takes time, and yes, climate change is a very urgent issue. But if we continue in the way that we've been going about, we being sort of the traditional white-led environmental groups have been doing this work, we're going to continue to cause harm. We're going to continue to leave people behind. We're going to leave behind the folks who are most vulnerable, who are already experiencing the harms of climate change and pollution. And we're leaving behind not only them as human beings, but we're also leaving behind their knowledge and their expertise and their wisdom in this work and in this fight. And so I think one of the biggest takeaways for me has been just understanding that this work is about, if we can't be in right relationship with each other, we're not going to be able to be in right relationship with our planet. And so again, just like those relationships and bringing that like humanity into the work is really, really important, and how we treat each other in the process is just as important, if not more important, than the outcomes.